A United States Congresswoman got maced trying to help mediate
Yes.
between police and protesters in Ohio. Representative Joyce Beatty is the vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and I want to talk about that, the new Justice and Policing Act. Good morning, Representative. What a pleasure to meet you.
Good morning, and certainly it's my pleasure to be on your show. Thank you.
Well, thank you for all you're trying to do. You have to tell me what happened here because I know you are such a respected voice in your community that even the police thanked you for coming down
Yeah.
to try and mediate. So you were okay. Let me just set this up for everybody. I know you said to an affiliate there, I was there because I wanted the young protesters to know that in solidarity that I stand with them. You know, I'm a grandmother, I'm an elected official, but I'm a black woman first, and I felt the pain. And so you were there trying to mediate tensions, right, between the police and the protesters. The cops thanked you for being there. So you were trying to separate an officer and a protester. So tell us what happened.
Well, and I think you set it up well, and it gives us what happens across this nation with some police officers. It was a very peaceful protest. I was there for all the reasons that you said. I was there as a black woman who happened to be all of those other things. When two of my colleagues and I crossed the street, when we saw more protesters, we wanted to make sure that they were up on the sidewalk and the curb. Some of them had gone into the street, but they had moved back. But then a different set of police officers came. They were the officers who had been on duty the night before in their strike. I'm going to call it military. They didn't have on their white shirts and their regular, like the regular police officers. So I believe they came with a different attitude. They were called in or deployed there to make things be set right. And so their attitude appeared to be, some of them, a little different. And certainly the crowd was vocalizing loudly and strongly and full of pain their First Amendment rights. And something happened with one gentleman, and that's all it took. When the police officer threw him over the bicycle to the ground, the crowd started pushing forward. Before I knew it, my arms were up in the air. I was hollering, "No, this isn't right. Stop." A young lady was hit with a bicycle. The end of the bicycle spun around, and the rest of it is there we were. And without announcement, the pepper spray started going everywhere. There was a young lady who was within inches of me, and as the pepper spray went directly at her, it doesn't have any direction. So my colleague, the president of city council, was sprayed, face forward. I received some of the spray, and so my colleagues removed me from there because it became overwhelming. Burning your eyes, lots of coughing.
Representative, can you clear up for Attorney General Barr that pepper spray is indeed a chemical irritant?
I can tell you it definitely is a chemical irritant. And we were very fortunate in many ways. There was someone who identified himself as a medic and saw me and had milk in his bag and gave us milk to put in our eyes, the burning, the sensation in your clothes, our mask. It was overwhelming. It was overwhelming. And I think it was unnecessary force for that occurrence and without it being announced.
And I mean, this just adds, that a sitting United States Congresswoman got pepper sprayed is, you tweeted about the president calling this 75-year-old white man that was shoved to the ground and is bleeding from his ear and still is in serious condition, I don't know, Antifa, something. You just said making excuses and more conspiracies is just revolting and disgusting. I mean, and that no Republicans really have the backbone to stand up and say the president is a conspiracy theory lunatic who is pouring gasoline on the racial fires in this country.
Exactly. The nation is on fire, and you have a president who is fanning it more than anyone. But what we saw with George Floyd, what we saw with the 75-year-old white man, it was bad enough that he was pushed and fell to the ground, hit his head. We could see the blood. But when an officer went over in a gesture to help him, another officer pushed him away.
Yeah.
And then they walked by him watching this man, just as they did with George Floyd, as he had his knee on mother, and they watch, that's unthinkable. It's just, so we have to do something. I feel like I have to breathe for George Floyd, and you do that by passing legislation such as the Justice in Policing Act. You do it by standing on the steps of the Capitol with the Congressional Black Caucus saying, we're not going to let you down. History repeats itself. Here we are 75 years later after a Rosa Parks was arrested basically because she was black. That's discrimination. That's profiling while you're black. Then here we are 56 years after John Lewis and Martin Luther King. So here we are at this moment in time, and it is going to be different, Stephanie. We will be passing legislation. We will be making sure that police departments across this country change their protocol, have more training, not be able to do the no-knock warrants. We're going to ban the chokehold.
You know, you mentioned that. I think just as a human being, that's what resonated so much around the country. Him calling out for his mother. Somebody said that was a call to all mothers everywhere.
Absolutely.
You know,
that was
go ahead. No, go ahead, Congresswoman. Sorry.
I think that is your rage or the motherly instinct, or as my mother said, you know, we have mother wit, that you just naturally go into a protective mode, and it doesn't matter what can happen to you when you're fighting for others. And that's what I felt like being down there, that I had a role to stand with the people and to, you know, push back and say, no, stop, this isn't right. Trying to at least speak up. And I was there along with other elected officials, not only here, and it's not about me, it's about any change that we can bring to bear. And police officers need de-escalation training. There needs to be a culture of community. I grew up when police officers had to live in the same community that they protected, so they had some ownership to it. And so we need community review boards. We need the citizen panels. We need all of those things. We need to remove police officers from trying to be social workers.
Well, thank you. There's things that, you know, they probably shouldn't and don't want to be involved in necessarily, right? Mental health issues and homelessness and opioid crisis and, you know, just the way we're handling a lot of this. So where do you come down on this defund the police thing? Because obviously Joe Biden said he is not for it. I think the polling showing only 16% of Americans, because of course the wording of it sounds radical. But clearly, when you talk about what it is, some of it starts with the, you know, Policing Act that you just talked about that Democrats are trying to pass in Congress, right? It's just allocating funds differently.
Oh, I think that we're basically on the same page, and I know words matter, but I think you make them repurpose their money. I think you make them take those money. We take the money and make them pay for their training. We don't give them additional funds. You know, across the country, we're cutting schools, we're cutting food stamps or SNAP. So I think we make them repurpose the money that they have. I think just like lawyers. You know, my husband is an attorney, and he's a scholarly attorney, but he has to go get trained every year. He can't just say because I have a law degree, I don't have to go back and receive training. So I think police officers must be required to have continuing education credits, or they lose their right to be a police officer. They have to take it, they have to pass it, and if not, they can no longer be a police officer.
Congresswoman, you know, I was saying how all of these tragedies have sort of, what's the word, kind of melded into one. As we know, George Floyd survived coronavirus to be killed by a policeman. Breonna Taylor was an EMT, one of the heroes helping us fight COVID, which of course is hugely disproportionately taking black lives. You tweeted COVID-19 cases are increasing again and Americans are demanding justice, but apparently poll numbers are his top priority. I mean, Trump is obviously handling both of these things disastrously, but, you know, this is really concerning, what's happening with coronavirus on top of all the rest of this. And I'm really afraid, aren't you, of what's going to happen in 2 weeks, the wave we're going to see after these very justifiable protests.
Oh, absolutely. We have found that people at the protests have tested positively. And here's another thing. While we're doing great things in many communities, like my community here, they're announcing today more community testing. With that, you're going to now find many of those on the street in the communities who haven't been practicing social distancing or have been in facilities where there was an issue with it being overcrowded. We're going to see, I believe, the numbers increase as they have been. And you mentioned it, the disparities. When you look at disproportionately here in my district, here in the state of Ohio, and across the nation, when you look at the percentage that black people make up in this country and in this state, and then you look at almost in double digits that we are testing positively twice as much as the population we represent, and the same for the death rate almost.
Yeah.
It's very frightening, but again, we know that there are systemic reasons for this. We know that racism is a national crisis right now. And we've hit that perfect storm. COVID-19 was happening across the country, whether it's George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery or back to Emmett Till or any of the people right here in my hometown in my district, Tyree Green. I mean, the list goes on and on. Tamir Rice in Cleveland. So I think one of the things we have to look at is also in housing. It's in healthcare.
Yeah.
It's an economy that we have had a knee on our neck.
Yeah.
And now people are speaking up. They're saying Black Lives Matter, and this is our time. It's not about the other lives. It's about Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I love the way, I can't remember exactly the way Reverend Sharpton put it, but, we're not asking for handouts. We're just get your knee off our neck. I mean, and I was saying the I Can't Breathe has become our anthem between coronavirus and police brutality.
Exactly.
But Congresswoman, the number one thing I want to ask you is real quick, what happened in Georgia and how are Democrats going to protect our voting in November, which is going to be maybe the last election we have? As we know, Georgia closed 214 polling places after the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. There were 80 fewer polling places in Atlanta, where the majority black voters live. So here we go, right? This is a dress rehearsal for November. What are we going to do?
Well, this is the national crisis, and I think another way to put a knee on our neck is by denying us the right to vote. Right here in Ohio, the General Assembly just voted last week on a House Bill 680 that takes away souls to the polls, takes away the early vote. That's another effort by this administration to take away our right to vote, because that's the only way we can make change. And this president knows that. So we have to do the same demonstration, the same protesting. And yesterday, watching people stand in line 6 feet apart, I was thankful for that.
Yeah.
But the hours it took, many people couldn't do it.
Please, Congresswoman, keep fighting that fight for us for vote by mail. And I know we're out of time, but thank you, because you're such a fighter for us in Congress. Please just keep fighting for our right to vote. And it's so nice to meet you finally, and I hope you'll come back.
I will. Thank you.
Thanks, Congresswoman. Okay, there she is. Representative Joyce Beatty of the great state of Ohio.